The invasion fleet of the Carthaxian Empire arrived at Earth's orbital perimeter on a Tuesday morning, which was their first mistake. Nobody accomplishes anything meaningful on a Tuesday. Commander Vex Narl stood on the bridge of the Obliterator-class warship Inevitable Dominance, watching Earth spin below like a blue marble that owed him money. His scales rippled with anticipation. 300 warships, plasma cannons charged, landing pods ready, atmospheric bombardment coordinates locked. Ground assault teams preparing their equipment. This would be the Carthaxian Empire's 73rd successful planetary conquest, and Vex Narl would finally get that promotion to Supreme Commander. He'd already picked out the ceremonial helmet. It had feathers. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Plix, his secondary eyes blinking in confusion. Plix was young, eager, and possessed the kind of optimism that hadn't yet been beaten out of him by reality. "From their military." Vex Narl cracked his knuckles, producing a sound like snapping twigs. "Tell them resistance is futile. I've always wanted to say that." "No, sir. It's from something called the Department of Terrestrial Requisitions for Hostile Incursions." Vex Narl's mandibles clicked in irritation. "The what?" "They're asking us to hold position and await further instructions. They've sent us, sir, they've sent us a form." The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of the engines and the distant sound of someone's stomach gurgling. Vex Narl had conquered 17 civilizations. He'd reduced the mighty Floxian armada to cosmic dust. He'd made the battle lords of Chixthor weep into their ceremonial drinking vessels. Nobody in his entire military career had ever sent him a form. "What kind of form?" he asked slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Plix manipulated the holographic display with trembling claws. A document appeared, rotating slowly in the air like a threat. It had 47 pages. 47. Form 847B, application for planetary invasion with intent to conquer, subjugate, or otherwise inconvenience the indigenous population. It requires our signature in 17 places, and we need to initial next to 14 separate clauses. And there's a section at the end asking us to rate our experience with the application process. "Delete it," Vex Narl roared, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "I tried, sir. It keeps coming back. And now there's a second email asking if we received the first email, and a third email apologizing for the second email if we already received the first email, and a fourth email—" "Stop!" This wasn't how invasions worked. Vex Narl had studied military history at the Imperial War Academy. He'd written his dissertation on overwhelming force as a diplomatic tool, which had received commendations from 3 different generals. You arrived. You demanded surrender. They said no. You blew up something important, but not too important, just important enough to make a point. They reconsidered, simple, clean, no paperwork. The textbooks had been very clear on this. Plix, run a full tactical scan. Where are their defense satellites? Their orbital cannons, their planetary shield generators? "Sir, there are none in range. No military response whatsoever. Just this transmission source. It's coming from a building in something called Slough, England." Vex Narl pulled up Earth's intelligence file, the one his reconnaissance team had spent 6 months compiling. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. There, buried in subsection 47, paragraph 892, was a notation he'd completely missed during the briefings. "Member State, Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union since Earth year 1952. All hostile actions require Form 847B submission and approval. Processing time, variable." "What in the name of the Void Empress is the Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union?" Vex Narl's voice had taken on a hysterical edge. Several bridge officers exchanged worried glances. Nobody on the bridge answered, because nobody knew. The Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union was, in fact, the single most powerful organization in the known universe, and nobody knew about it except the beings unfortunate enough to work there or interact with it. It had been founded approximately 12 million years ago by a species called the Formulaxians, who had evolved bureaucracy before they'd evolved fire, and who had subsequently evolved into pure bureaucratic energy before finally evolving into a race of sentient filing cabinets. The Union had been spreading its administrative tendrils across the galaxy ever since, making sure every single act of aggression, territorial dispute, trade disagreement, or even mildly stern conversation was properly documented in triplicate and filed in the correct cosmic filing cabinet. Earth had been accidentally registered during a clerical error in 1952 involving a misplaced radio signal, a bored office worker on Formulax Prime, and what the official report later described as an unfortunate keystroke incident. The humans had no idea this had happened. The aliens had no idea anyone actually took the bureaucratic union seriously, but Gerald Pembridge took it very seriously. Gerald Pembridge was 47 years old, bald in a way that suggested his hair had simply given up on him, and possessed the kind of face that looked like it had been designed by a committee that couldn't agree on anything and eventually just said, "Good enough," and went to lunch. He worked in a grey building in Slough that most people walked past without noticing, which was exactly how he liked it. The building was so unremarkable that GPS systems occasionally forgot it existed. Pigeons roosted on the roof, not out of preference, but out of a complete lack of better options. The Department of Terrestrial Requisitions for Hostile Incursions occupied the third floor, sandwiched between a tax processing office and a room full of broken office furniture that nobody had gotten around to throwing away. It had been established in 1952 after the bureaucratic registration, funded with a budget so small it was technically classified as a rounding error, and for 73 years it had received exactly 0 applications because nobody knew it existed. Until today. Gerald was eating a cheese sandwich when the form arrived. Not an expensive cheese. Nothing fancy. Just standard cheddar on white bread with a thin scraping of butter, because Gerald believed that luxury was the enemy of focus. He chewed slowly, methodically, looking at his computer screen with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been constipation. The screen showed an incoming application notification. The timestamp said it had arrived exactly 4 minutes ago. He set down his sandwich, brushed the crumbs from his fingers with the care of a surgeon preparing for an operation, opened the attachment and read. Then he read it again. Then his face transformed into something that could only be described as pure, undiluted joy. It was the smile of a man who had finally found purpose in a meaningless universe. It was the smile of someone who had spent 23 years filing reports nobody read, processing forms nobody needed, and maintaining systems nobody cared about, and who had now discovered that all of it had been leading to this single, perfect moment. "Bethany," he called across the office, his voice cracking with an emotion that might have been excitement or might have been a minor stroke. "We've got one." Bethany Wu looked up from her crossword puzzle. She was 28, perpetually exhausted in the way that only government employees understand, and had taken this job because it was the only position she could find that didn't require her to interact with the public. The irony that she was now Earth's point of contact with hostile alien civilizations was not lost on her, though she tried not to think about it too much, because thinking about it made her want to lie down in a dark room and question her life choices. "One what?" she asked, not looking up from her puzzle. 7 letters, futility of existence, starting with M. "An application." Gerald's voice reached frequencies usually reserved for dolphin communication. "A real, actual, legitimate application for planetary invasion." Bethany set down her pen. She walked over to Gerald's desk, coffee mug in hand, moving with the kind of reluctant curiosity normally associated with approaching strange noises in attics. She read the form, She read it again. Then she started laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from deep existential appreciation of the absurd, mixed with the dawning realization that reality is far stranger than anyone ever wants to admit. "They're serious," she wheezed between laughs. "They actually filled it out. Look at this. They even included their fleet composition and estimated casualties." "Not correctly, though," Gerald said, his smile fading into something more predatory, more focused, more dangerous. His fingers flew across the keyboard like a pianist preparing for a concert. "Look at Section 7. They failed to provide proof of current registration with the Galactic Conquest Licensing Board. And Section 12. They haven't included a certified copy of their intent to harm document, notarized by a neutral third party." "Gerald," Bethany said carefully, "do those organizations even exist?" "According to the guidelines, they do. And if they do exist, then these Crethaxians need to provide documentation proving they're registered. And if they don't exist, then they need to provide documentation proving they don't exist, which would require them to contact the organizations to confirm non-existence, which would paradoxically prove existence, which would then require registration, which brings us back to the documentation issue." Bethany felt a strange warmth in her chest. It might have been the coffee, which was terrible as always. It might have been joy. It might have been the early signs of a heart attack. Should we tell someone about this, like the military or the Prime Minister or literally anyone with authority, and interrupt the proper channels? Gerald looked horrified at the suggestion. "Absolutely not. That would be a violation of procedure. We receive the application, we process the application. That's how the system works." He opened his email client. "I'm sending them the rejection notice." "Just like that? Just like that." Gerald typed with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had been waiting his entire career to do it. The rejection email was a masterpiece of bureaucratic precision. It outlined 17 separate deficiencies in the application. It referenced 12 different subsections of regulations. It included helpful links to resources that didn't exist. It ended with, "Thank you for your interest in invading Earth. We look forward to receiving your revised application." Commander Vex Naril was 3 hours into composing a strongly worded response to the form, explaining in increasingly creative terms exactly what he thought of bureaucratic processes, when the rejection arrived. He read it once, twice, 3 times. Then he put his head down on the console and made a sound like a dying engine trying to turn over on a cold morning. "They rejected us," he whispered into the metal surface. "Sir?" Plix ventured carefully. "They rejected us." Vexnarel lifted his head, his eyes wild. "Insufficient documentation. They want proof that we're licensed to conquer planets. They want notarized documents. What even is notarization? Who notarizes intent to harm?" Lieutenant Plix's scales turned a pale green, which in Crethaxian physiology indicated either fear or indigestion. "Sir, I don't think anyone has a license to conquer planets. That's not how conquest works." "Exactly!" Vexnarel stood up, his chest heaving. "This is clearly a stalling tactic, a primitive defense mechanism, some kind of psychological warfare designed to confuse us. We should ignore it and proceed with the invasion." "Sir," Plix said quietly, pulling up a document on his tablet. "According to Intergalactic Law, Section 449, Paragraph 72, any member state of the Bureaucratic Union is protected by the full weight of—" "Oh no. Oh no. Nza, what? Sir, if we invade without approval, we'll be in violation of 17 different treaties. The fines alone would bankrupt the Empire, and there's a provision here about military tribunals, and something about asset seizure. Sir, they could impound our fleet." Vexnarel sat back down. Then he stood up, then he sat down again. Then he stood up, walked 3 steps to the left, turned around, walked 3 steps to the right, and sat down once more. This couldn't be happening. He'd studied warfare at the Academy for 8 years. He'd written his dissertation on overwhelming force as a diplomatic tool which had been published in the Imperial Military Journal. He'd given lectures. He'd taught courses. Nowhere in his education, in his training, in his career had anyone mentioned forms. "Fine," he growled after several minutes of silent rage. "Fine! What do they need? We'll give them their stupid documentation. How hard can it be?" The answer, as it turned out, was very hard. What followed was the most humiliating 6 weeks of Commander Vexnaril's military career, and this was a career that included the time he'd accidentally bombed his own supply depot and the incident with the dignitary's ceremonial robe. He had to petition the Crethaxian High Council for a galactic conquest license, which required him to explain, in writing, why he didn't have one. The High Council was confused. Nobody knew conquest required a license. The entire concept was baffling. Conquest was what you did. It wasn't something you got permission for. That defeated the entire purpose. "But the regulations say," Vexnaril began during the emergency session. "What regulations?" demanded High Councillor Thrax, an elderly Crethaxian whose scales had faded to a distinguished grey. "We make the regulations." "Not these regulations, sir. These are intergalactic bureaucratic union regulations." "And who are they?" Nobody knew. Research was conducted, ancient records were consulted. It turned out the Crethaxian Empire had signed the Bureaucratic Union Charter approximately 300 years ago, during what the historical records described as a very confusing trade negotiation where everyone was tired and just wanted to go home. Nobody had read the fine print. Nobody ever read the fine print. The fine print was where bad things lived. The High Council, after 3 days of debate, 17 hours of which were spent arguing about lunch arrangements, created an office to issue galactic conquest licenses. This office required funding. Funding required approval from the Treasury. The Treasury required a detailed breakdown of conquest-related expenses for the fiscal year. Vexnaril spent 3 days in a windowless conference room with an accountant named Threxlin, who kept asking things like, "What's the depreciation rate on a plasma cannon?" and "Are landing pod fuel costs tax deductible?" and "Do we expense the psychological trauma counseling for conquered populations, or do they cover that themselves?" Vexnaril began having stress dreams about spreadsheets. Meanwhile, the inevitable dominance and its fleet of 300 warships orbited Earth, burning fuel at an alarming rate, accumulating what turned out to be parking violations from Earth's orbital traffic management system, which was apparently also run by the Department of Terrestrial Requisitions for hostile incursions. Each day, like clockwork, a new fine appeared in Vexnaril's inbox. 500 credits for unauthorized stationary orbit, 750 credits for obstructing satellite lanes, 1,200 credits for what the system called loitering with menacing intent, 1,500 credits for aggressive posturing in a designated peaceful zone. "Who is issuing these?" Vexnaril screamed, waving a tablet covered in violation notices like a man trying to swat invisible insects. "The same office, sir. Department of Terrestrial Requisitions for hostile incursions. They have parking enforcement." "Apparently, sir. And according to this notice, if we don't pay within 30 days, they'll issue a warrant for the immobilization of our fleet." "They're going to boot our warships?" "That's what it says, sir." Gerald Pembridge did indeed have parking enforcement authority. He also had authority over orbital traffic patterns, atmospheric entry permits, hostile vessel registration, aggressive posture licensing, and something called threatening gesture management. He'd discovered all of these authorities buried in the original 1952 charter, written in language so dry it could start fires. He exercised all of these authorities with the enthusiasm of a man who had spent 23 years filing reports nobody read, processing forms nobody needed, and maintaining systems nobody cared about, and who had finally found an audience. Bethany watched him work with a mixture of awe, concern, and the growing suspicion that she was witnessing something historically significant. "Gerald, you know they could just Blow us up, right? They have 300 warships. We have... What do we have? A filing cabinet and a stapler? They could, Gerald agreed, not looking up from his keyboard, where he was drafting yet another violation notice for unauthorized reflective hull plating in a residential orbital zone. But they won't. How do you know? Because they're asking. The moment they asked, they acknowledged the system. And once you acknowledge the system has you. They're trapped now. Not by weapons or threats, but by their own bureaucratic instincts. He clicked send on the parking violation. These Crethaxians are more bureaucratic than they realize. That's their weakness. They believe in hierarchy. They believe in proper procedure. They're psychologically incapable of just saying, forget this, and doing what they want. He was right. The Crethaxian Empire was, at its core, a civilization built on hierarchy, procedure, and proper channels. They had 17 different ranks of commander, each with specific responsibilities and authorities that could not be exceeded without written permission from the rank above. Their military academy had mandatory courses on filing after-action reports. Their greatest military victory, the Battle of Thorix Prime, had been commemorated not with a monument, but with a 40-page memo distributed to all military personnel. They had forms for everything. Forms for combat, forms for retreat, forms for celebrating victories. They even had a form you had to fill out to request permission to fill out another form. They were very susceptible to bureaucracy. 6 weeks after their arrival, after numerous petitions, 17 committee meetings, 43 emails, 12 video conferences, and one incident where Vexnarel threw his tablet across the bridge and it accidentally hit the pilot, causing a minor orbital drift that resulted in another parking violation, Commander Vexnarel finally resubmitted Form 847B with all required documentation. He'd lost weight. His scales had dulled. He'd started having nightmares about filing cabinets that chased him through endless corridors, lined with identical grey doors. The new submission was perfect. Every field filled, every signature in place, every document attached. He'd even included a cover letter explaining the purpose of the application, which wasn't required, but which he thought might show good faith. Gerald received the resubmission at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday. He had just finished his afternoon tea. Earl Grey, no sugar, splash of milk. He read through the application carefully, making notes in the margins with a red pen. Bethany brought him a second cup of tea without being asked, which was her way of showing moral support, or possibly enabling problematic behavior. She wasn't sure which. "Well?" she said after 20 minutes of silence. Gerald looked up. His eyes were bright behind his glasses. "It's better. Much better. They've provided the conquest license, the notarized intent document, proof of current registration with all relevant bodies. They've even included the environmental impact statement for their planned bombardment, which is technically optional, but shows initiative. So you're approving it?" "Oh, absolutely not." "What? Why not?" Gerald pointed to the signature line on page 23. They filled it out in blue ink. Bethany set down her tea carefully, with the deliberate control of someone trying not to throw something. "So, Section 2, Subsection 4, clearly states all forms must be completed in black ink or digital format. Blue ink invalidates the entire application. It says so right here." He tapped the relevant paragraph. "Gerald, they've been orbiting Earth for 6 weeks. Rules are rules, Bethany. Gerald, if we make exceptions, the entire system collapses. Today it's blue ink. Tomorrow it's green ink. Next week people are submitting forms written in crayon. Where does it end? Gerald, I'm begging you. Rejection notice sent." When Commander Vexnarel received the second rejection, he didn't scream, he didn't throw anything, he didn't make threats or demands. He simply sat very still for approximately 5 minutes, staring at the screen with an expression that his crew would later describe as concerning. Then, in a very quiet voice that was somehow more terrifying than shouting, he said, "Lieutenant Plix, Find out everything you can about Gerald Pembridge. Sir? Plix's voice was hesitant. Not to harm him. I want to understand him. I want to know what drives a being to this level of commitment to procedure. Also, find out where he lives. I'm going to send him a gift basket. A gift basket, sir. I'm going to do this correctly, Plix. If Gerald Pembridge wants forms, I'll give him forms. Perfect forms. Flawless forms. Forms so immaculate that rejecting them would be an insult to the concept of bureaucracy itself. The third submission arrived 2 weeks later. It was printed on premium paper. It was bound in plastic covers with color-coded tabs separating each section. It included a table of contents and an index. Every signature was in black ink. Every field was filled with perfectly printed text. It was beautiful. It was a work of art. Gerald spent an entire day reviewing it, going through each page with the thoroughness of someone examining a rare manuscript. It was perfect. It was absolutely, completely, 100% compliant with every regulation. His hand hovered over the approved stamp, which he'd bought himself because the department budget didn't cover such luxuries. Then Bethany, who had been watching over his shoulder, noticed something. Gerald, look at the date. What about it? They dated it October 3rd. Yes, that's when they submitted it. Gerald, it's now October 17th. We're 14 days past submission. And, Section 89, Paragraph 14, all applications must be processed within 10 business days of submission or they're considered void and must be resubmitted. Gerald's hand froze over the stamp. He looked at Bethany. She looked back. They both knew what this meant. So, we have to reject it, Bethany said, though she already knew the answer. We have to reject it, even though it's perfect. Because it's perfect, the better the application, the more carefully we must apply the rules. Otherwise, what's the point of having rules at all? The rejection notice that landed in Vexenarel's inbox was polite, apologetic, and utterly merciless. It explained the timing issue in detail. It suggested that in the future, perhaps they should submit applications with more consideration for processing timelines. It thanked them for their patience and understanding. Vexenarel read it 3 times. Then he began to laugh. It was the laughter of someone whose sanity had finally given up, packed its bags, and moved to a small cottage in the countryside where it could live out its days in peace. Sir? Plix ventured carefully, ready to call medical. No, Vexenarel said, still laughing, tears streaming down his scaled face. No, I'm really not all right. I'm so not all right. I've reached new levels of not all right that science hasn't even discovered yet. Should I call the medical team? No, no medical team. Just submit the form again, immediately, right now, this instant. Sir, perhaps we should consider alternative approaches? Vexenarel's laughter stopped abruptly. He turned to look at Plix with eyes that had seen too much. What alternative approaches, Lieutenant? What could we possibly do that doesn't acknowledge the system? The moment we arrived here, the moment we asked for permission, we became part of this. We can't invade now. We can't leave. We can't do anything except what we're already doing. This is our life now, Plix. We submit forms. We wait for rejections. We resubmit. This is what we do. This is what we've always done, apparently. And this is what we'll always do. The 4th submission was rejected because they'd used the old version of the form. The template had been updated the previous week. Nobody had told them there was no notification system. They were simply expected to check the website regularly for updates. The 5th submission was rejected because they hadn't included proof of payment for the processing fee. Nobody had mentioned a processing fee in any of the previous correspondence. When Vexenarel asked about the processing fee, he received a link to another form, Form 6634Q, which would allow him to request information about processing fees. This form itself required a processing fee. Vexenarel briefly considered throwing himself out of an airlock. Then he remembered he'd need to fill out a voluntary spacecraft egress form first, and he couldn't face any more paperwork. By week 12, the crew of the inevitable Dominance had settled into a routine that felt less like military service and more like a slow descent into bureaucratic purgatory. Morning drills, conducted with decreasing enthusiasm. Afternoon form-filling sessions where officers gathered around tablets, helping each other interpret regulatory language. Evening stress management sessions led by the ship's psychologist, who had started taking stress medication herself. Morale was at an all-time low. Several crew members had requested transfers, which required Form 334T, which was taking weeks to process. One ensign named Crix had simply walked out of an airlock after lunch one day, though he'd notably filed the proper voluntary spacecraft egress paperwork first, including the environmental impact statement and next-of-kin notification form. The crew held a memorial service. They would have given him a medal for dedication to procedure, but that required a form nobody wanted to fill out. Then Bethany found the audit notice. "Gerald," she said, her voice tight, "we have a problem." Gerald looked up from his lunch. Egg salad today. He'd been eating the same lunch rotation for 12 years. Cheese sandwich Monday, egg salad Tuesday, ham sandwich Wednesday. The routine was comforting. "What kind of problem?" "The Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union just sent us an audit notification. They're reviewing Earth's membership status." "That's fine. We've been compliant with all regulations." Gerald took another bite of his sandwich. Gerald. Bethany turned her laptop around so he could see the screen. "They're auditing the Crethaxians too, and according to this, the Crethaxians haven't paid their hostile intent tax in 300 years. Gerald stopped chewing. He set down his sandwich with great care. "How much do they owe?" Bethany showed him the number. It was large. It was very large. It was the kind of number that astronomers use when discussing the mass of celestial objects. Gerald whistled, low and long. That's more than most planetary GDP totals. It gets worse. If they don't pay, they'll be banned from filing any hostile action requests for the next 1,000 years. But if they do pay, they'll bankrupt their empire, their entire empire. We're talking economic collapse, societal upheaval, probably civil war. For the first time since this entire situation began, Gerald felt something other than satisfaction. He felt something almost like sympathy, almost like guilt, almost like the dawning realization that perhaps he'd been enjoying this a bit too much. "Well," he said slowly, carefully, that's unfortunate for them." "Unfortunate? Gerald. We might be about to cause the collapse of an interstellar civilization. We're not causing anything. The rules are. We're just enforcing them." "There's a difference?" Gerald thought about this for a long time. "There should be," he finally said, though he didn't sound convinced. When Commander Vexneril received the audit notification, he didn't react at all. No screaming, no throwing things, no dramatic gestures. He simply forwarded it to the Crethaxian Treasury Department with a note that said, "This is your problem now. I'm taking a personal day," and went to lie down in his quarters, where he stared at the ceiling and contemplated the heat death of the universe, and whether it might come sooner if he asked nicely. The Treasury Department reacted to the notification by having a collective nervous breakdown. The hostile intent tax was real. It had been on the books for millennia, buried in legislation so old that the paper copies had fossilized. Nobody had ever enforced it because nobody had ever been caught trying to invade a bureaucratic union member state. The tax was based on a complex formula involving fleet size, intended duration of occupation, estimated casualties, and something called malevolence coefficient that nobody fully understood. The Crethaxian Empire owed 847 trillion credits. The Empire's entire treasury contained 312 billion credits. They were short by approximately 846 trillion, 688 billion credits, give or take. Emergency sessions were called. The High Council convened at 3 in the morning. The Empress herself was woken up and briefed, which she did not appreciate because she had very specific feelings about her beauty sleep. Suggestions ranged from pay in installments over the next 10,000 years to declare war on the bureaucratic union, to everyone fake their deaths and start a new civilization under assumed names. Finance Minister Krickstall, who had been Treasury Secretary for 30 years and had thought he'd seen everything, stood before the council and delivered what would later be remembered as the "We're all going to die" speech. Your Majesty, councillors, we have three options. First, we pay the tax and watch our economy collapse like a neutron star. Second, we refuse to pay and get banned from all hostile actions for 1,000 years, effectively neutering our empire's expansion capabilities. Third, we dispute the tax assessment, which will take decades to resolve and cost almost as much in legal fees. Which do you recommend? Asked the Empress. Personally, I recommend we all resign and move to a nice, quiet, agricultural planet somewhere. In the end, they did what any sensible debtor does when faced with an impossible bill. They filed a dispute. Disputing an intergalactic bureaucratic union tax assessment required Form 2390K, a document so complex it made Form 847B look like a grocery list. It was 37 pages of questions like, why do you believe this assessment is incorrect? And have you considered that you might be wrong? And, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you regret your life choices? The form had to be submitted to the Union's Dispute Resolution Department, which was located on a space station in neutral territory, 3 weeks' travel from Crethaxian space. Commander Vexnaral, despite his best efforts to avoid further involvement, was ordered by the Empress herself to deliver the dispute form in person, because apparently his life wasn't difficult enough already. The dispute resolution station was exactly what you'd expect from a place designed by committee over the course of 12 million years, with no clear vision and unlimited budget overruns. It was grey. It was enormously grey. The kind of grey that made you question whether colours had ever really existed or if they'd just been a pleasant dream. The station had corridors that led nowhere, offices that didn't exist on the directory, and a public transport system that occasionally transported people to floors that hadn't been built yet. The receptionist was a floating orb of light that spoke entirely in pre-recorded messages and couldn't answer questions, respond to emergencies, or acknowledge that it was a being of pure energy trapped in customer service hell. Welcome to the Dispute Resolution Center. Please take a number. Your estimated wait time is 17 months. We appreciate your patience. Vexnaral wandered the corridors for 4 hours before finding the right office. The signs were in 17 different languages, none of which were Crethaxian. The directory was 8 years out of date. He got lost 3 times in the same hallway, which he was fairly certain was physically impossible, but had stopped questioning because his grip on reality had become negotiable. When he finally arrived at Office 4471B, exhausted, defeated, and questioning every decision that had led him to this moment, he found himself face to face with a being that looked like a cross between a filing cabinet and existential dread. "Number?" it said in a voice like rustling paper being fed through a shredder. "I don't have a number." "No service without a number. Take a ticket from the dispenser." Vexnaral took a ticket. The number was 4721. The display on the wall currently showed number 3. 3, not 3000, not 300. 3. "This will take years," he said, his voice cracking. "The average wait time is 17 months. The being said without emotion or sympathy or any indication it was capable of feeling anything except deep commitment to queue management. "Please take a seat. Refreshments are available in the waiting area. The vending machines accept all major currencies except the ones you have." Vexnaral looked at the rows of empty chairs. He looked at the ticket in his hand. He looked at the number on the wall. He considered several options. Violence, which would probably result in even more forms. Bribery, which would likely require a form to officially report the bribery attempt. Tiers, which would probably also require a form. In the end, he sat down and waited, because that's what the system demanded. That's what it always demanded. He waited for 6 hours before the number changed to 4, then it changed back to 3. Then the display turned off for a while, then it came back on showing number 857, then it changed to 12. Then someone came out and announced that the numbering system had reset and everyone needed to take a new ticket. Vexneril took a new ticket. This one said 9043. He began to understand why some species developed telepathy just so they could silently scream at each other. Back on Earth, Gerald was having his own crisis. The audit had revealed something interesting, and by interesting, he meant potentially catastrophic. Earth's membership in the Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union had never been officially confirmed. The original registration in 1952 had been flagged as pending verification, and nobody had ever followed up. For 73 years, Earth had been in bureaucratic limbo, neither fully a member nor fully not a member, existing in a state of quantum administrative uncertainty. "What does that mean?" Bethany asked, though part of her really didn't want to know. "It means," Gerald said slowly, his voice taking on the quality of someone explaining how a bomb works while sitting on that bomb, "that Earth might not actually be a member state. Which means the Crethaxians' invasion application might not have required approval at all. Which means we've been rejecting their forms for 4 months based on membership status that might not be valid." They stared at each other across Gerald's desk. The office suddenly felt very small. The grey walls felt like they were closing in. Somewhere in the building, a fluorescent light buzzed with existential uncertainty. "We have to tell them," Bethany said. "Do we, though?" "Gerald, think about it, Bethany. Really think about it. If we tell them now, they'll invade. 300 warships, plasma bombardment, ground assault teams, hundreds of millions dead. Cities destroyed, everything gone, civilization collapsed. But if we don't tell them, they'll stay stuck in this bureaucratic loop forever. They're already disputing their tax assessment. That dispute will take decades to resolve. By the time anyone realizes Earth's membership was never confirmed, everyone involved will be retired or dead or will have evolved into a higher form of being that doesn't care about paperwork. That's incredibly unethical. Yes. We'd be lying by omission. Yes. We'd be perpetrating a fraud on a galactic scale. Technically, yes. People could lose their lives if the truth comes out, and the Crethaxians decide to invade anyway out of spite. Yet many fewer than would die in an invasion today. Bethany sat down heavily in her chair. It squeaked in protest, which seemed appropriate for the moral complexity of the situation. She thought about her job, her boring, pointless, mind-numbing job that she'd taken because she didn't want to deal with people, didn't want responsibility, didn't want to matter. She thought about the fact that she was now somehow responsible for the fate of Earth. She thought about how her career counselor in university had told her that government work was stable and undemanding. "This is the worst day of my life," she said. "Mine too," Gerald agreed, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. There was a gleam in his eye that suggested he was, on some level, enjoying this. "Tea? Make it strong. Very strong, possibly with something that isn't tea." Gerald made tea. They sat in silence, drinking, contemplating the weight of their decision. Outside the window, Slough continued its existence with the usual enthusiasm of a place that had long ago given up on dreams. People walked past the building without noticing it. The world spun on, completely unaware that its survival hinged on 2 civil servants and their willingness to maintain a bureaucratic fiction. "We need to confirm Earth's membership," Gerald finally said, "properly, officially, so that this never becomes an issue again." "How do we do that?" "We fill out Form 118M, Application for Retroactive Membership Confirmation. It's designed for exactly this situation, actually. Apparently, we're not the first planet to have unclear membership status. Of course there's a form for that. There's a form for everything, Bethany. That's the beauty of the system. Over the next 2 weeks, Gerald constructed the most comprehensive membership verification file in bureaucratic union history. He found the original 1952 registration, which had been filed by a radio astronomer in New Mexico who'd been trying to send a message to aliens and had accidentally filled out what he thought was a reply form, but was actually an application for membership. He created a detailed history of Earth's compliance with all bureaucratic union standards, most of which Earth had never heard of, but had somehow accidentally complied with anyway through sheer coincidence. He wrote recommendation letters from himself, from Bethany, from the Department of Terrestrial Requisitions for hostile incursions as an organization. He even found a way to make Earth's complete ignorance of the Union sound like humble modesty rather than bureaucratic incompetence. The file was 400 pages long. It included appendices. It had footnotes that referenced other footnotes. It was magnificent. It was absolute nonsense supported by technically accurate information. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a magic trick where you distract everyone with complicated hand movements while hiding the rabbit in your coat. Gerald submitted it on a Monday morning, which was slightly more optimistic than Tuesday, but not by much. The response came back 3 days later. Approved. Earth's membership was officially confirmed, retroactively validated, and permanently established. The confirmation included a certificate suitable for framing and a complimentary pen with the bureaucratic union logo. "We did it," Bethany whispered, staring at the approval notice. "We did," Gerald agreed. We just saved Earth through paperwork." "Yes? Nobody will ever know." "No, they won't." "Ma." They sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished and the fact that it would never be recognized, never be celebrated, never be mentioned in history books. "Should we celebrate?" Bethany asked. "How?" "I don't know. Go to the pub, get drunk, dance on tables." Gerald looked horrified. "Bethany, it's only 11 a.m., and we have work to do. These parking violations won't issue themselves." Commander Vex Naril was on hour 73 of waiting at the dispute resolution station when he received the notification. Earth's membership had been officially confirmed. His invasion application process, which had just become even more complicated because the confirmation triggered a mandatory reassessment of all pending requests related to the newly confirmed member state, would now take an estimated 90 years to resolve. He read the notification twice. Then he forwarded it to the Empress without comment. What could he possibly say? What words existed in any language to describe this situation? The Empress read the notification. She read it again. Then she called an emergency council session and said words that would be recorded in Crethaxian history books as the beginning of the great administrative reform. "Get our ships out of there." The order came down through proper channels, because even in defeat, the Crethaxians couldn't bring themselves to violate protocol. Form 772Q, Request for Mission Termination. Form 893R, Fleet Recall Authorization. Form 1044B, Acknowledgement of Strategic Failure. Each form filled out correctly, signed by the appropriate authorities, filed in the proper databases. The inevitable Dominance and its sister ships fired up their engines for the first time in months. Half of them had mechanical issues from sitting idle. The accumulated parking violations, totaling 4.7 million credits, were added to the Crethaxian Empire's debt ledger, which at this point resembled less a financial document and more a cry for help. The mission was officially designated administratively inconclusive, which was military speak for, "We give up, but we're too proud to say it directly." Commander Vex Naril stood on the bridge as Earth shrank in the view screen. He felt nothing. Not relief, not shame, not anger, just a vast emptiness where his military pride used to be. He'd spent 4 months trying to invade a planet and had been defeated without a single shot fired. He'd been conquered by a bald man in Slough who liked cheese sandwiches and proper procedure. "Sir," Plix said quietly, "what will you do now?" "I'm resigning my commission," Vexnarel said. "I'm going to open a restaurant. Something small, something simple, something that doesn't require forms." Adi, he did exactly that. 6 months later, he opened a small establishment on the Crethaxian homeworld called The Void's Embrace, which served comfort food and had a strict policy against discussing military service. It became surprisingly popular among retired officers and bureaucrats who needed a place to eat without being reminded of their jobs. The house special was a dish called Earth Survivor, which was just pasta, but came with a side of regret. Lieutenant Plix stayed in the military, but requested a transfer to logistics, where he could work with forms in a controlled environment that didn't involve potential intergalactic incidents. He eventually wrote a best-selling memoir titled Waiting for Approval, My 4 Months in Earth Orbit. It became required reading at the Crethaxian Military Academy as a cautionary tale about the importance of intelligence gathering and the dangers of assuming primitiveness based on technological level. One particularly astute cadet asked during a lecture, "But sir, if Earth was defended by bureaucracy, couldn't we have just destroyed the building in Slough?" The instructor, a grizzled veteran who'd served under Vexnarel, looked at the cadet with tired eyes and said, "You think we didn't consider that? We ran the scenarios. If we destroyed the building, we'd be liable for property damage, environmental violations, and unauthorized kinetic impact on a civilian structure. The fines would have been even worse than the parking violations. Plus, there would have been forms to fill out explaining why we destroyed it. You can't fight bureaucracy with violence. That's the whole point." Back on Earth, Gerald received a commendation from the Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union for outstanding dedication to process integrity. It came in a frame that was slightly too large for his cubicle wall, but he made it work by moving a calendar that nobody ever looked at anyway. The certificate was printed on nice paper with embossed lettering. It made him genuinely happy in a way that most people would find deeply sad. Bethany requested a transfer to a different department, citing stress and the need for a change of environment. Her request was denied due to insufficient justification. She filed an appeal, which was also denied due to improper formatting. She filed a second appeal with proper formatting, which was accepted for review, but would take 6 to 18 months to process. She stopped doing crossword puzzles during work. They reminded her too much of forms, and she'd had enough forms to last several lifetimes. Gerald continued coming to work every day. Same grey building, same squeaky chair, same lunch rotation. He still processed forms that almost nobody would ever see, maintained systems that almost nobody knew existed, and followed rules that almost nobody cared about. The only difference was that now, sometimes, he'd look out the window at the sky and smile, knowing that somewhere up there, hostile alien civilizations were thinking twice about Earth, not because of weapons or warriors, but because of him. Earth continued spinning, completely unaware that it had been saved. The news never reported it because nobody knew about it. There were no parades, no medals, no public recognition, just 2 people in a grey building in Slough who had accidentally become the most effective planetary defense system in human history. The Crethaxian Empire's tax dispute wound through the Bureaucratic Union's resolution system like a river through a maze. Preliminary hearings, evidence submission, counter-evidence, appeals, counter-appeals. The legal team assigned to the case eventually numbered 47 beings from 12 different species, all of whom looked at the case file and wished they'd chosen different careers. The current estimated resolution date was the year 2247, though everyone involved acknowledged this was optimistic. 3 months after the fleet's departure, a second alien species arrived at Earth's orbit. The Vrindali Collective, a hive-mind civilization that had conquered 47 planets through overwhelming numerical superiority and really excellent coordination. They had done their research, or so they thought. Earth appeared primitive, divided, weak, perfect for conquest. They received Form 847b approximately 11 seconds after entering the solar system. The hive mind, which consisted of approximately 8 billion individual beings sharing one consciousness, read the form simultaneously. All 8 billion instances of the consciousness had the same reaction at the same time. Oh, no. They'd heard the stories. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories by now. The Crethaxian incident had become legend. Military academies across known space were teaching case studies. The form itself had become famous, discussed in hushed tones by generals and admirals who understood that the galaxy had changed somehow, that humanity had introduced a new type of warfare that nobody knew how to fight. The Vrindali Collective read the form again. They read the requirements. They looked at the documentation they'd need to provide. They calculated the probability of successful application completion. The number they got back was so small it was essentially zero. The fleet turned around and went home without sending a single communication. Word spread faster than light could travel, passed through quantum communication networks and subspace message relays. Earth became known throughout the galaxy not as a primitive backwater, but as the most terrifyingly bureaucratic planet in known space. The planet where form defeated fleet, where paperwork was more powerful than plasma cannons, where invasion forces went to have their spirits broken by administrative procedure. The very mention of Form 847b caused hardened warriors to shudder. Battle-scarred veterans would sometimes wake up screaming about subsections and notarization requirements. Military academies across the galaxy added new courses: Administrative Warfare 101, Advanced Bureaucratic Threat Assessment, Understanding Earth-Style Defensive Documentation. Gerald's office began receiving applications from other alien species, but not for invasion. They wanted to hire him. The Floraxian Empire offered him a position as Supreme Bureaucrat General, with a salary that would make planetary governors weep with envy. The Thexian Dominion offered him his own moon, fully terraformed, with a staff of 200 assistants, if he'd teach their administrators his techniques. The Quilixian Federation offered him immortality treatments and the title of Lord Administrator of all things that require forms. He declined every offer with polite, professionally formatted rejection letters. "Why?" Bethany asked after the 7th offer arrived, this one from a civilization that wanted to pay him in pure, crystallized energy, which was apparently quite valuable. "Gerald, you could be rich. You could be powerful. You could leave Slough." Gerald looked at her like she'd suggested he start eating his lunch at different times. "I have a job. I like my job. My job involves rules and forms and the quiet satisfaction of checking boxes. Why would I want anything else?" Because normal people want more than that? Then I suppose I'm not normal people." He turned back to his computer, where he was drafting another parking violation for a Zalaxian scout ship that had been loitering near Mars. "Besides, someone has to protect Earth, and as long as I have a stamp, a filing system, and an unhealthy attachment to proper procedure, Earth will remain the only planet in the galaxy defended by the most powerful weapon ever created, which is tediously thorough administrative oversight, of course." Years passed. Earth remained blissfully ignorant of its guardian in Slough. The Department of Terrestrial Requisitions for Hostile Incursions processed exactly 0 invasion applications after the Crethaxian incident, but received 17,000 inquiries from alien civilizations asking about the application process, all of whom decided not to proceed after reading the requirements. Gerald got older. His hairline, which had already retreated, accepted total defeat. His glasses got thicker. His lunch routine never varied. He became a fixture in the grey building, as permanent and unremarkable as the water-stained ceiling tiles and the printer that only worked on Thursdays. Bethany eventually received her transfer approval on her 43rd birthday, approximately 8 years after filing the request. By that point, she'd gotten used to the job and declined the transfer, filing Form 445K, voluntary withdrawal of transfer request. Her crossword puzzle skills had improved dramatically. She'd even started entering competitions. The Intergalactic Bureaucratic Union continued its 12-million-year mission of making sure every action in the universe was properly documented. They added Earth to their list of success stories, which was a very short list, because most civilizations either ignored the Union entirely or collapsed under the weight of their own administrative systems before achieving anything notable. Somewhere in deep space, aboard a freighter hauling merchandise between star systems, a young Crethaxian cadet asked an older crew member about the infamous Earth incident. The cadet was fresh out of the academy, full of enthusiasm and naive questions. "Is it true?" the cadet asked during a meal break. "Did we really spend 4 months trying to fill out a form?" The crew member, who had served on the inevitable Dominance, nodded slowly. They'd been a junior engineer at the time, responsible for maintaining the engines while the ship sat idle, burning fuel and accumulating violations. "We did. But why didn't we just ignore it and invade anyway? We had 300 warships. They had nothing." The crew member was quiet for a long time, chewing their food with the deliberate slowness of someone trying to find the right words. "Because the moment you acknowledge the paperwork owns you. Remember that, cadet. You can conquer a planet with weapons, but you can never, ever conquer a properly implemented bureaucratic system. The forms always win." The cadet laughed, thinking it was a joke, the kind of dark humor that military personnel use to cope with absurdity. The crew member didn't laugh. They'd seen the forms. They'd watched Commander Vexneril's slow descent into bureaucratic despair. They'd attended the memorial service for Ensign Crix, who'd walked out the airlock rather than face another rejection notice. They knew the truth that the Academy couldn't teach, because it was too terrible and too absurd to be believed by anyone who hadn't experienced it. The forms always win. On Earth, in a grey building in Slough that most people walked past without noticing, Gerald Pembridge finished his afternoon tea and returned to his desk. There was a new email in his inbox, another inquiry about invasion procedures, this one from a species called the Morpholites, who wanted to know if they could invade Earth. "Just a little bit, maybe just one country. We promise to be respectful." Gerald smiled, opened his reply template and began typing. "Thank you for your inquiry regarding hostile action authorization. Please find attached Form 847B, application for planetary invasion with intent to conquer, subjugate, or otherwise inconvenience the indigenous population. All fields must be completed in black ink or digital format. Processing time is variable. We appreciate your patience and look forward to receiving your application." He clicked send, took another sip of tea, and returned to his crossword puzzle. Bethany had left it on his desk with a note. 7 letters, futility of existence, starting with M. Gerald thought for a moment, then filled in the answer. Mundane. Not because it was correct. It wasn't. The correct answer was malaise. But Gerald had learned something important over the years. Sometimes the wrong answer filed properly was more powerful than the right answer filed incorrectly. And in a universe full of chaos, uncertainty, and hostile alien civilizations, there was something deeply comforting about knowing that paperwork, properly executed, could save the world. Earth spun on, defended not by armies or weapons, but by a bald man who ate cheese sandwiches, followed rules with religious devotion, and understood that the pen wasn't mightier than the sword. The form was mightier than the sword. The properly filled out, correctly dated, appropriately signed, thoroughly reviewed, and meticulously filed form. That was the real power. That was what kept the darkness at bay. And in a universe that had learned this lesson the hard way, nobody was going to test Earth's bureaucracy again, not for a very, very long time. Gerald finished his crossword, filed it in his desk drawer with all the others, and looked out the window at the sky. Somewhere up there, 300 warships had once waited, ready to rain destruction on his planet. They'd been defeated without violence, without bloodshed, without anyone on Earth even knowing they'd been in danger. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't dramatic. It wouldn't make a good story because the truth was too absurd and too boring at the same time. But it was real, and it was effective, and it was proper. And that, Gerald thought as he began drafting his daily activity report, was all that really mattered.